Hey everyone, welcome to Practical Alchemy. Today we are going to be doing part 3 of our beginner's guide to Fusion 360. And we are going to be specifically talking about some additional sketch tools. We're going to be talking about the linear and circular pattern tools. We're going to talk about joining bodies together, and we're going to be talking about the fillet and sketch commands. Those are going to be our big topics of today. Now, before we dive in, there is one thing that I did off screen that I want to tell you about, which is go through and name the features on the timeline. So you can see as I hover over them, they do light up in the workspace, but they also now have a name: body shell, peg guts. It doesn't really matter what you name them, but especially as this timeline starts to get longer and longer, it is really helpful to go through and name your parts. So as you start to scrub back and forth and you're adding features and you're changing features, it makes your life a lot easier. Now, let's dive in. So when we last left off, we had created the primary geometry of our brick, and we had added some extrusion ribs to help support the interior and to connect to the pegs. There are a few additional ribs that you would see traditionally on a construction brick perimeter to hold those pegs together. We did not model yet. We could have modeled them in the same sketch, but there's some new things that I want to show you here. So let's create a new sketch, and it's going to be right there. Now, that is going to snap us to the bottom plane where we're sketching, and we want to pull a little bit of reference geometry. So hold down the shift key, middle mouse click to rotate. I'm going to grab this edge, and this circle. And then I am also going, actually I don't want to grab that circle. Let's grab the interior circle. And then I'm also going to grab from this side the two pegs. Now this is, like I said, a little bit repetitive because we've already done a lot of this work, but go here and project, and hit OK. Now we're going to go to the bottom to square everything up and zoom in, turn off the body so it makes everything a little bit more visible, and we are good to go. Okay, now let's go ahead and select all of this stuff, and we are going to turn it into construction geometry because we're not actually going to be using it for any type of modeling purposes. And let's start drawing in those corner ribs. So thinking about how we can constrain things geometrically before we constrain them dimensionally, I know that the ribs are going to be coming from the center of this circle. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line straight up from the center of the circle, and I'm going to snap it to the top and hit escape to leave that tool. Switch this to construction geometry. I'm going to zoom in a little bit just to make sure that we're focused. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is create my peg. I'm going to do that with a rectangle. And what do I know about this rectangle? Well, I know that the top edge is going to be constrained to this line, and I know that it is going to be centered along this vertical. So the easiest way, I think, to do that in a single constraint is to add a midpoint to this top edge, hit escape, and then I'm going to constrain that midpoint to this endpoint, hit coincident constraint, and now they are snapped together. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create an offset circle around this peg. Similar to the big center peg here, remember we need to create some type of tolerances for our 3D printer or our CNC machine or whatever it might be. So I think I used 0.3 as my interference fit tolerance. Hit escape, convert that to construction geometry. And now, what do I want to do here? Well, now I can use that tangent command to constrain this edge of the rectangle to this circle. Okay, so I can select both of those, hit tangent, and now that you can see that this is tangentially constrained to the top. And the benefit of that is that if I were to go back and change that tolerance, let's say my bricks were fitting together too tight or too loosely, I can change this and it will automatically adjust. I'll do it a little bit bigger just so you can really see it and adjust the length of that. Okay, let's go back to 0.3, and now we just need to constrain the width of this, and we are going to do that with the dimension. So only one dimensional constraint and 3 geometric constraints here. So let's do 2.5 looks good. I don't know what the official is, but this thing is pretty big anyway. Okay, now we have one rectangle. So again, thinking about geometry, what do we know? Well, we know that it is going to be around the perimeter of this circle. So how could I mirror this? Instead of creating the geometry again, how could I mirror it? Well, I know that if I were to set this line at a 45-degree angle, so coming out from the center at a 45, convert this to a mirror line, I could actually mirror across this. Now that's new. We haven't done that before. So far we've only been mirroring across verticals or horizontals, but you don't have to. You can set this mirror line at any angle and it will mirror across it. So watch, if I hit the mirror tool, and now I select my object, you can see because this is the only center line in the sketch, it's already selected it. All right, and hit OK. Now, you can see I've got rectangle here of the same dimensions. Okay, why did I add this to my sketch? Well, it's because I want to show you a different type of patterning, similar to the mirror tool, but not exactly the same, and that is the circular pattern tool. So if I think about this brick, I know that I have 4 pegs. I'm going to turn this off for a second just so you can see it. I know that I have 4 pegs around this circle. So rather than mirroring them along a straight line, I can pattern them around a circle, and I can create those pegs at all those corner locations. So let's turn this body back off, and let's create the circular pattern tool so you can see what it does. First, it's going to ask me to select the objects. So I'm going to select all of these peg bosses. Then I'm going to go to this. What is my center point? I can actually select a point or an arc. It will recognize either. And now it's going to bring up some additional circle pattern options or dialogues. Okay, so the first thing it's going to ask me is my angular spacing. So do I want to go all the way around the circle, or do I want to go a certain distance? Maybe I want to do along an arc. I'm going to go with a full, and then it's going to ask me the quantity. Well, I want them at all 4 corners of this circle, so I'm going to click 4 and then hit OK. And as you can see, it has patterned this geometry around this circle. All right, and this is actually constrained, so I can repeat it, and I can also edit it. So if I needed more, I could add more. Not that I'm going to here, so I'm going to hit escape. But now you can see that I've got this pattern around the brick. So it will touch all of these pegs. Pretty cool, with only 2 little sketches. So using the mirror tool and the linear and, in this case, it's called the rectangular pattern tool, but it works the same way, right? Really, really useful for quickly adding geometry to your sketches. Okay, and with that, we can finish this sketch and exit the view by holding down the Shift key, middle mouse key, and rotate. Okay, let's go ahead and extrude this. So hit extrude, and it's going to ask me for the geometries profiles that I want to extrude. I'm going to get all of them. Okay, except these 2 over here. I actually don't need them. It was easier to have them in the pattern, but I don't actually need them all. So I'm going to ignore those. Extrusion type is going to be set to object because I want them to come all the way up to this edge here. And there we go. Now, what I'm going to do here is, as long as we're doing this, I'm going to show you another tool. And so in this operation, rather than have it join to this body and become part of the main brick, we're going to go down here and select New Body and hit OK. And what you can see has happened is, in addition to the 3x2 brick body, we also have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 6 other bodies. All right, and it's kind of hard to see. So great, this is an opportunity to show you another tool. If I right-click on this body and go to Appearance, that is going to bring up the Appearance tab. And the Appearance tab is going to allow me to change what it looks like in the workspace. Down here, you can see there's a big library of materials that Fusion 360 has in as a default. For something like this, I'm just going to use the plastics because I think that's pretty solid. And I'm going to pull up ABS resin, just the first one here. And I'm going to move it up to the design space. Now, by default, it is white, but by double clicking it, I can change some of the appearance properties, specifically the color. So I can come over here and I can drag the color slider over. Maybe I want it to be a nice bright green color. And I can also change the roughness and the reflectance. That is not going to make a huge difference, in my opinion, in the day-to-day workspace. It makes a lot of difference if you are going through and rendering. So then I'm going to click Done. And then what I can do is I can drag this onto the body that I want to apply it to. You can see that the main 3x2 brick has turned green. That will update. So if I turn it to more of a blue color, it will turn blue. But we'll leave it green for now because I think that's a nice color. And hit Done. Okay, now what we can do here, the reason that I wanted to keep those separate is because I wanted to show you how to do a mirror, not of a sketch entity, but of an actual body. So up here on the Create command in the dropdown, you can see we've got not only the Extrude command that we've used so far, but we can also mirror down here. So I'm going to click on mirror, and it's going to ask me what type of mirror I want to do. You can actually mirror a lot of different things: faces, features, features being like what we just did in extrude, so you can mirror that extrude to a different location. In this case, we're going to select bodies because these are separate bodies. And now it's going to ask me which objects I want to mirror. So I only want to mirror these 4 in the corner because I've already got one here and right here. I don't need them again. And next, it's going to ask me for my mirror plane. Let's pause here and think back to the very first sketch that we did. And what did we do? It was very important that we took the rectangle and we constrained it to the origin point here so that it was vertically and horizontally symmetric across the origin. Why is that helpful now? Because it's symmetric across the origin, I can use my primary reference planes as my mirror planes. So in this case, I'm going to use the XY plane to mirror across, and you can see that these ribs are now going to be mirrored to the opposite side, and it's guaranteed that they are going to touch this edge that I pulled from this sketch. And hit OK. Great. Now that I've got all of my ribs laid out, I'm going to show you a new command called the Join command. So, or in this case, the Combine command. Different CAD programs are going to call it different things. Some of them call it a Boolean operation. Some of them have separate tools for combine, subtract, etc. But similar to how when we did an extrusion, we had the opportunity to join it to the main body, we can actually join separate bodies together after they've been created. So go up here and click Combine, and it's going to ask me the target body and the tool bodies. Okay, so as you can see, one is singular, one is plural. The reason is that basically one is what you're going to use as the end result, the thing that you want to end up with, and then the tool bodies are the things that you're going to be using to get there. And that doesn't sound that important. It will make more sense when we start to subtract bodies. So I will show you this again. For joining, it doesn't really matter, but we're going to use the target body as our main body, and then our tool bodies are all of the ribs here at the corners. And you can see that they change colors as they are joined, and also it loses the line over here. So we've got 9, one more to go. There's 10. And I don't want to, one of the things that it's going to ask me is new component. So do I want to create a new component that has all these together? And also, do I want to keep the tools, right? So if I don't want to keep the tools, they basically become merged with the original body. If I keep them, they are going to be merged, but it's going to be a duplicate that's merged. So you're still going to see all of these in the feature tree. So I'm going to not check that, hit OK, because I want it to be condensed down back to that original 3x2 brick. Okay, great. So we have a brick with all of our ribs around the corner. I think for today, we are done extruding now that we've seen some of these additional options. So next up, let's start to do some additional modification, focusing in here on the Fillet command. Oh, pause for a second. Hit save. We have not saved in a while. We're going to call this V6 in my case. I'm going to have a lot more versions than you do because I've been doing these tutorials as a dry run and then going back and recording them. So you probably don't have that many saves, but maybe you do. Remember to save often. Okay, now what we need to do is introduce the Fillet command and the Chamfer command. So some CAD programs will actually have them as part of the same tool, but with different options selected. But in this case, they are separate tools. So you have the Fillet command, which is a rounded corner, or a Chamfer command, which is a hard angular corner that you can add to things. So the first thing that we are going to fillet is the edges of all of our ribs. So when you select the Fillet command, it's going to bring up the dialog box. And the first thing that you're going to do is you are going to start selecting the corners that you want to fillet. Now you have two options here. You can either fillet a face or you can fillet a corner. I would say 9 times out of 10, I always select edges. The reason that I always select edges is because, I want a little bit more control. And if I select the edges, it's just, for me, easier to visualize what all is happening in the plane and in the space. So there are definitely instances, especially when I'm working faster, that I will want to just go ahead and fillet everything. But a lot of the times, I'm filleting edges selectively. Okay, and as you can see, as I select them, more edges are being added to the dialog here. Okay, now the default value is going to be set to 0, so you need to add some value to that. So in this case, let's start off with 1. Just hit 1. And then you can see that it's created this rounded corner. Before you hit enter on this command, you can push and pull this so you can see what the different sizes would look like. That's really cool. And you can also adjust that on the fly. This handle, now I want to point out one thing. There's 2 different handles here. One is the arrow, which is going to allow you to adjust the fillet radius itself. This one is going to allow you to change the tangency weight. We can talk about tangency weight at a different time. By default, it's going to be set to 1. We'll come back to that. There's reasons to change the tangency weight, but for a beginner tutorial, you don't need to know anything about that. We're just going to be focusing on the radius of the fillet. So let's actually change that to, okay, so we know this diameter, or this distance, is 2.5. So if we change the radius to half of that, 1.25, that's going to essentially give us a full round fillet, right? Because the radius is half of the diameter. So you can imagine this is the diameter of a circle. And so that's going to give us a nice, smooth, full round radius. Okay, and now we have our first radius down here in the feature tree. Okay, and I'm going to rename this. I'm going to just call this the rib fillet. Okay, great. Now let's continue on our radiusing journey. So we're going to create another radius. I'm going to flip this little guy over. And I'm going to create another radius that does all of the corner elements. So let's grab all of these edges here. And I am going to grab these, and let's set this to, we're going to make it a little bit smaller. Let's set it to 0.5. So it's just a nice, small, tight radius. One thing that, as we're doing this, is kind of interesting is when you look at objects out in the environment and you're modeling things, even things that look like they have sharp corners generally have a very, very small radius on them. And that can be from, manufacturing tools start to wear down over time, or your 3D printer has a little bit of, roundness to the print, or whatever it might be. But if you're doing this 3D modeling for, a really high quality resin printer, or photography, or digital rendering, it's always nice to add really small fillets to things because it helps the camera or the computer capture the light as it hits the edges. So not super, super important to add a fillet to every single little thing, but if you are trying to render things and make them look really nice, adding some small fillets on the corner are definitely going to help. In fact, when I did the thumbnails for this video and part 1 and 2 earlier on, I added some fillets before I rendered those out so that you could see them. Okay, now let's say I want to add some additional edges to this, or I forgot an edge. I can go back and edit this feature. And with this selection set up, this is a little counterintuitive. You can hold down the Control key, and it will actually allow you to add or remove edges from that selection. All right, that's a little bit odd in my opinion because everything else you hold down Shift to select multiple things, but for this you hold down Control. Okay, and the other thing that you can do is you can actually add additional features with different radiuses to the same fillet command. So if I add a set to this selection, I can now go in and I can select the tops of these circles, and I can set those to be a different radius. So let's just say 1 by default. Okay, and you can see now this is part of the same command technically, but it is a different radius. People have different thoughts on this. Personally, for me, I do not like to have multiple selections as part of the same feature unless I'm just trying to create a different radius on, essentially the same edge. And the reason is because if I'm going back and editing things, I like to be able to identify what's where. So it's really easy for me to say, okay, this is the, hit OK. We're going to go in and rename this. I'm going to call this the outer edge fillet. And then I want the peg fillets to be their own thing. There's reasons why you would want to combine them, and I can show that to you in a different video. But for basic things, I just like to separate them out just because I like to have, yes, this feature tree does become a little bit busier, but I really like to be able to see what the fillet is for where. Let's go with 0.75 for the top of the peg. And we'll break our rule here, and we'll just add the bottom peg fillet here, and I'm going to set this to 0.5, just slightly smaller. 0.5, okay. And you can kind of see that in real time. I think that looks really nice, and hit OK. We can rename this and call this the peg fillet. Okay, great. Now there's a couple of other things that I want to fillet. All right, so let's go in here and let's add some fillets to the internal geometry. Okay, now let's say I want to go in and fillet these edges. All right, this is actually a lot of edges to try to select. And I want to show you something. So let's cancel this because this is a lot of edges. Now, remember in the last video, we scrubbed backwards in our timeline so we could place features before other features. So I would have a lot less edges to have to select if I filleted this edge before I joined these additional tiny little ribs in here. So let's do that. Let's scrub back on our timeline to before that union. All right, so these are now separate pieces. And let's go in and add a very small fillet to these edges. You can see now it's got that entire edge. That makes my life a lot easier. That's like 10 less edges that I have to go through and select. All right. And then let's also go in and let's, talking about faces, let's go ahead and select these faces as well. Whoops, ignore that. Just going to select all of the edges around the perimeter and the faces of these upright support ribs. All right, I know there's a lot of rotating and zooming. I apologize for that. There we go. So we've selected all of the bottom edges here, the interior sidewalls, and these faces. All right, we can grab the tops of these faces as well. If I can grab it. All right, and let's just make that a very small, like 0.5. You can see it's a nice little small radius. Hit OK. All right, great. So now you can see I've got a nice radius on the inside. Oops, and I forgot one. So I need to go back in, hit Edit Feature, Control, add this edge, hit OK. Awesome. Now, watch what happens. Let's save real quick. Hit OK. All right, and now when I scrub forward and join these together, you can see that this edge now goes all the way through, but it still gives us this nice hard corner here that we can now add our next fillet to. So I'm scrubbing forward on the timeline again, one more step. So you can see we've got these nice rounds here. Very cool. All right, great. And we're going to keep scrubbing forward all the way to the front. So just thinking about it in terms of, modeling in real time when we don't have kind of pre-dimensioned sketches to start with, we can go back and forth in the timeline, and the order of operations in which you develop some of your sketches is going to be really, really important. All right, now, next thing we're going to talk about is the chamfer command. So the chamfer command works the exact same way as the fillet command. All right, and I'm going to chamfer this edge here and this edge here. And let's just start this off with a 1 millimeter chamfer. Okay, by default, the type of chamfer is going to be an equal distance, right? So that means the distance this way and the distance this way. So the rise and the run of that chamfer are going to be the exact same. Other two options allow you to adjust that. So two distances or distance and angle essentially do the same thing. It's just how you put in the variables. So two distances, right? The rise, so that's this one. You can see it by the active area. Let's increase that to 2. All right, and that looks good. So essentially that's a half of a 45-degree angle, so 22.5-degree angle. All right, so I could do the same thing by going that way, right? So you can see 26.2. I guess my math was low. All right, and so I hit OK. And there we go. We've got a nice little fillet there. All right, I do want to add one more chamfer here before we call it. I'm going to add a nice little chamfer around the bottom edge here, and that's going to help us pick up our bricks or pull our bricks apart. So let's create a new chamfer here, and I'm going to select around this edge. Now, one thing that's kind of cool that we haven't shown you yet is the tangent chain, right? So if that's turned off, it's going to select all these edges individually. If I have tangent chain selected, it's going to do exactly that. Anything that's a connected chain will automatically chamfer. All right, and these are actually a little small, so they're not going to do it. I'm going to select all the way around here, and I'm going to go back to equal distances, and I'm going to take this to 0.1. That's really small. That's maybe a little bit too small. So let's go edit feature, and let's go 0.25. Cool. That's just a nice little edge chamfer that's going to make it easier to separate our bricks if we were to actually construct this. And that is looking really, really awesome. I think this is almost a finished brick. Let's add, just for giggles, let's just add a slight little chamfer around all of these edges here. All right, so let's just do like 0.25, very, very tiny, but just gives us a nice little visual. And heck, let's add to this. Let's go ahead and add, and can I do it? Oh, forgot. Hold down Control. Let's go ahead and do these edges too. We're going crazy with the chamfers, but that's okay. Might as well get some practice in. All right, and as you can see, it's got a nice little chamfer here. I'm sorry, a nice little fillet here, just around it. I think that's going to help smooth the entry into and out of the brick. We could have done that as part of the chamfer command as well, but not a huge deal there. All right, great. So now we've got this really, really nice looking brick. But now that we've got some finished bricks, we've got to stack them up. So there's one more command that I'm going to show you before we end this tutorial, and that is the pattern command. So we did a pattern as part of our sketch. We can also do, similar how we patterned and mirrored both sketches, entities, and bodies, we can do the same thing with actual geometry. So let's go down to the Create menu, and we are going to Pattern. We're going to do a rectangular pattern. Bodies, what objects do I want to pattern? Well, obviously my one really cool brick. Direction, you basically just have to select an edge, right? Or a line, and it'll show you what direction it's going to go. Okay, and now the distance, let's set it at 22. I'm going to go further. Opposite way. Oh, yeah, there we go. There we go. And let's do 2. Okay. Look at that. And now we are going to stack up our bricks. All right. So you can basically change the number, the distance, and you can actually select multiple directions. I'm just going to do one direction. If you set 0, select that to 1. Okay, and then we hit OK, and now you can see it's created a separate brick. Doesn't look super interesting because they're the same color, so let's go into our appearance menu and expand that. And I'm going to drag up the ABS again. I'm going to make it a cool orange color. Done. And I'm going to now drag this to my other brick. And there we go. We've got some stacked up bricks. And I can look at this, and you can't really see all of the cool stuff that's going on. So last thing I will show you today is an evaluation tool. So we've already gone and shown you how to change the visual style to wireframe with hidden edges, and that shows you not only the external geometry but also the internal geometry. So you can see here that we've got these nice ribs that are coming up and touching our pegs, kind of. But another way to look at the internals and see how things are interacting is to go up to the inspection command, or up to a menu, and you can click on, where is it? Oh, selection analysis. Sometimes it's called section view. It's called section analysis here, and I was not used to that. Select on the plane that you want to basically use as a cutting knife, almost like you were to put this on a table saw, right? And you can basically cut through this object. And you can see as I drag here, let's look at it right about there. It's good. Hit OK. And as I zoom in, so I've been working in a lot of different CAD programs recently. You can see that I've got my ribs that are getting really, really close to my pegs. And I've got this nice looking internal peg structure that's getting really close to touching up against my pegs there. All right, so you can see we've got this really great construction brick stacking going on. I can turn off the section analysis by opening up the analysis tab here, and I can actually go in and either hide it if I want to keep it for later in case I want to like make some changes, or I can actually delete it. That's a really cool feature. That's really nice that you could just suppress that. That's really, really awesome. Okay, and there we have it. You can now marvel in the beauty and the glory of your construction brick that you have created. I remind you to like this video if you enjoyed the content, and subscribe to this channel if you'd like to learn more and follow along with this series as I continue to develop videos. If you have any questions, you can leave those down in the comments below. I will try to answer them as soon as I can. And if you have any particular topics that you'd like me to cover in future videos, leave those in the comments as well, and I will do my best to add them to future playlists. All right, everyone. Thank you again so much for tuning in, and I will see you in the next one.